The hidden secrets. John already said goodbye to William. Some procedures had to be done for him to join the Night's Watch. After saying goodbye to his cousin, William stayed for one night in Mole's Town. Why wait? Well, Tyrion had to leave before, even if he wanted to be friends with the dwarf, William needed more freedom for his future acts. He could not risk being discovered or even doubting his behavior. A big advantage of him in this world was knowing others while others didn't know him, no more than a Stark's orphan. The less attention William attracted at this moment, the better. At some point loneliness becomes inevitable. Obviously he was with Stark House soldiers as guard, but even with them it was almost the same as being alone, the damn soldiers couldn't make a decent conversation. William was here looking for the clues the Stark library books showed him, with a little luck he could find what he wanted here. If it did not work out, he would be forced to cross the wall and go after the children of the forest and try to get information about the rituals from them. It doesn't take much thought to know that going after them would be extremely complicated, with the uncertainties that this trip possessed eventually made it into something unwanted. Many hidden problems await him as he passes the wall. William planned to infiltrate Castle Black. Looking into the setting sun, William was preparing for his nightly plans. Night. William was walking slowly toward the buildings. Fortunately, Black Castle had no defensive wall, just guarding the wall, no defense against the people coming from Westeros. Hasty decision. On a night as dark as this one, when only torches could provide any defense for mortals against the infinite dangers lurking in his vale, William was home. William was easily able to get close to the library, did not even need the advantages of his transformation into Lycan for this, only the benefits he derives from his human body was easy for him. Entering the library, William quickly begins to look through the parchments and moldy books, some so old that one can only feel the splendor of the old days, the golden, bloody ages. A collector's paradise. There was an infinity of books in this library. It was really surprising that remained in this place, so far from the eyes of the world. Of the few who would have the benefit of reading them in this place, surely secrets were hidden. Looking at all those books, all those old languages, from the common languages to the forest folk, even having Valyrian scrolls. It was worth every effort to learn as much language as possible in your childhood. The suffering was not in vain. William wanted to take them all away. His curiosity about the facts buried here left him breathless. Unfortunately, he couldn't take them away. He needed to focus on the important, focus on the reason that led him here. So frustrating. Looking at books on ancient history and rituals, William almost drowned in a monumental pile of old books. Within a few hours, William systematically reduced the books to those more directed to what he wanted. There were 30 copies among books and scrolls, some small, some giants. He undeniably could not steal them all. With pain, William focused on books about the ancient gods, the forest people, and the Valyria scrolls. There were still 10 books. Since he had some time before dawn, William chose to read some of the books he would not remove from this place. Just before it was too late to sneak out of the morning light, William began to return to Mole's Town. Although forced to read quickly and systematically, William had gained some information about the rituals he wanted. There had been cited in several books some deeds that proved to be a legend, myth, superstition, and perhaps reality, and this was about one of the strangest and possibly the most evil forms of magic lurking in this world, the blood magic. As William had read in the books that were somehow seen through sacrifices and strange things to an end, certain strange happenings happen, among them the fact that more was talked about a legend of Azor Ahai. The legend of Azor Ahai. Born at a time when darkness was hovering over the world, to become a hero, he needed to wield a flaming sword, the legendary Lightbringer, and to follow the hero's path. First was forced to forge his sword, and using everything in an attempt to make his weapon, everything failed. The only means by which he succeeded was when he pierced the sword in his wife's heart, forging the sword with her blood. Before he could be a hero, had to sacrifice his love. It has also been cited in some ancient scrolls the supposed use of blood magic to make Valyrian steel and other things. Many secrets and mysteries surrounded this magic. Which most surprised William was the Scroll of Valyria, whose title was only Blood and Fire, talked about some rituals involving the people of Valyria. Unfortunately, a lower part of the scroll was erased because of his age, but a single word was left, almost disappeared, but it was still possible to read. Thus Valyria's children were born. Were born. William thought. Aren't Valyrians born naturally? Maybe it was born through an ancient ritual, using some form of blood magic or something. Unfortunately, only curiosity was there. Fortunately, there was a clue about scrolls, many of them about maze makers, all about ancient cities. William had changed his plans, would not go from King's Landing to Bravos, would go first to Loreth, hopefully, could find out more about blood magic or facts that were already buried in the sands of time. But no doubt William would not abandon this information, he should go after the historical remains and try to learn more about this secret, but for now, with a book in hand, a book that was written in the language of the forest people. I need to do some experiments. William thought. 11 comments 0 vote. Road to Loreth 1 part. William had found in an ancient book that was written in the language of the forest people, a supposed ritual in which he applied certain concepts of the ritualistic used in ceremonies to the old forest gods and the application of certain practices of blood spells. In which the first step would be to use the heart trees, the second point would be to establish the sacrifices, those made in flesh, blood, and life. Observing the data in other rituals, William planned some way to make it the initiation mechanism. A way for him to be the only one who could spawn Lycans from the zero, a way to have control over all his descendants. William knew that the secrets he carried in his bloodline could not only be understood through the rules of this world, there was something else about him, something that should not belong to this world. With this difference between what he was and what this world showed for certain, the pinnacle of his goal, even if it was far away, would be to be not a zero patient for a disease, but something like a true lord for his descendants. William could not only give others access to so much power without having a way to control them, without a way to limit the power of those who obtained it. For this reason, the tests must be performed, even if in the future the ideal choice of a Lycan descendant was loyalty, he needed to begin his tests on despicable people. The mental burden of a death was noticeably diminished for the present William, but he could not indulge in indiscriminate slaughter, he had to maintain some humanity, some reminder of what he once was. Even if it was easier to find any unlucky man on the street and make him an individual for testing, it would undoubtedly tarnish William's fragile part, be a blemish on his soul, something unforgivable to him. Knowing that his early tests would inevitably be flawed, William needed to find perfectly inclined individuals to be his test subjects. The problem eventually returned to an old point, the difficulty of finding these people in the north. Not that the impartiality, coldness, of the people of this age in the face of evil, did not approach them to the censurable in his sense of modern morality. But it was necessary to know that in order not to cause problems in his actions, those who would be his patients would have to come from one place constantly. In addition to having access to these individuals, he needed a perfect place for that, but of course all this thinking could be for nothing, he had not even tried giving his blood to someone else. Looking at all the points that needed to be seen, at least the ones he could see so far, William was waiting for the night again. Even though finding a thug was difficult in the north, it was not impossible. At night William again sneaked out of his room without the Winterfell guards seeing him. Wandering the streets of this tiny mole's town, wandering in the shadows, with no curious pair of eyes able to see him, William began to hunt his prey. His eyes caught every movement, his nose sought the sweet smell of blood. In his human form, William tried to push his senses to the max, it was a way of training them. Not so much improvement, not close to how much he had fed, the changes that happened at that time were noticeable, unlike this training that obviously had to be done for a long time to make these changes noticeable. Trying to control his wandering thoughts, William began to run around the city. There was nothing here, not today. William didn't plan on having such a trip without productivity. Without thinking twice he searched for a suitable place to hide his clothes and changed, so that he kept his human stature, just needed the physical bonuses that his Lycan form possessed. With mind-blowing speed, William began to wander close to the small residences that were far from the city, small residences that could hold ominous secrets. But that day was destined to be unproductive. I have to get out of here fast, I already got what I wanted, William thought. William considered going beyond the wall to find those lived exactly as the titles of savages indicated, but he would need a lot of time, that would alert his guards, all hell would break out then. With a quick decision, William would leave, could not waste his time here. Trying his best to feel pleased to have found so much information, William went to sleep. Looking to the horizon, William was trying to see what this primitive immensity held, his gaze beyond the wall only calm, even though he knew that somewhere below the White Walkers they were rising, crawling across the ground and slowly forming a massive and cruel army. The only thought that really mattered to him was that beyond this wall were more secrets, that there were giants below, and that there might be a trace of magic below. Unfortunately, he was not prepared to go there, he was alone and very weak yet. Only the urge for one day to step remained, but it would undoubtedly be in the rather long future for a human, perhaps only here 5 years would be possible, perhaps a little longer, an answer for another time. Hello guys, I need your attention for the future about this novel. The problem is, I make a mistake. For me, Dany marry only close to the death of Ned Stark, but isn't it? Dany marries at the same moment as the king arrived in Winterfell. Well, we don't have time to save her, no more. But I can change the time. How? I can write she go marry with 15 years old, number 13. Or something similar. But if you want, I can keep the plot the same as the original at this point, which I think would have little adhesion, and Dany marries Drogo. What changes with that? Many things. Unfortunately, Dany would lose his naivete. I'm not talking about her virginity, but I say about her mind. I think from that point her mind began to break to justify the end of the canon. If she marries Drogo, she obtains a strong personality. If she doesn't marry, she doesn't obtain a strong personality. I wanted to change that, the marry, but things are too fast. It would be impossible to rush the plot to the point that William could save it without breaking all the plot of the GOT. So the question I want to ask is, do you mind if I change the order of time, delaying her marriage by 2 years? Or you want things to go as they are and have no problem with her marrying Drogo? After all, he is destined to die. So I would be posting 2 posts in this cap. Give it a like to the one you support. Also, write messages justifying some points that you think I should observe. I would also like to thank you for reading my fanfic. Thank you very much. For those of you who have read this after the choice has already been made. I am on my way to a freer path, even if it is the world of GOT and its normal interactions. The MC created and will create original stories. Some GOT intrigues will exist, but not exactly in the format you saw on the TV series. This is a world created by Martin, but in this novel, it's altered and expanded about my vision. I'm not comparing myself to Martin. I really appreciate him for creating this fantastic world, but as the name of the novel indicates, this is a fanfic, fiction made by a fan. IngloriusEnd creators' thoughts. 40 comments 0 vote. A little bite doesn't hurt. Road to Loreth 2 apart. A few weeks of travel and William was near Dreadfort. With a letter in hand, he wondered if his plan would work. It was a slightly risky plan, not to say that he was betting on the lottery. William knew that he needed to find ways to strengthen those loyal to Stark House, but more importantly, it would be a means to weaken his main opponents. No doubt things had to be adjusted first in the north. And here was the function of the letter William held, a letter that had orders from Lord Stark of Winterfell, a letter that William had a hard time making his uncle write. It was not the only letter Lord Stark had created, but it was one of which William had planned. It was necessary to remember that Roose Bolton was loyal to Stark House, at least it would be so until he began to conspire with the Freys and Lannister. With this loyalty in hand, William needed to create a way for the Bolton to not betray the North or a way to fragment Roose's power. So the letter's function was simple, a direct order from Eddard Stark for the Dreadfort forces to be separated into certain fractions and sent to various places on the pretext of being an idealized training to prove the value of the North in the eyes of the king. It was a simple manipulation. It was to spread the idea that the king was unhappy with the current appearance of the North and had Ned do something about it. The truth is, only 2/5 of the Bolton's total strength would remain with Roose, the rest would be gradually given to truly Stark loyal people. William just needed to talk to Roose and demonstrate the need for such acts. It was too early for any doubt about these actions. Roose didn't suspect his hands were being tied. Entering slowly into Dreadfort, William began to analyze this fort that had a strong history, a place that only collapsed for lack of supplies, a place that was not successfully invaded. Undoubtedly it was a rugged place, high and thick-walled walls, several towers and their merlons had the appearance of stone teeth by their triangular shape, such a dark fort, such a Machiavellian appearance. It was the house of a little monster, the house of a psycho who liked to flay, the house of Ramsay Bolton. William had strong memories of Ramsay's deeds, maybe others in his place would shiver at the thought of it, but to William, it didn't matter. Ramsay was just another box that maybe he would open one day to see inside, a snack to eat to pass the time at best. But still, William wondered if he should let things go for Reek's birth, or should he show some compassion for Theon before he became a descendant. Looking at the lined-up soldiers, a man who was waiting for him, William tries to focus on the things he should do now. One of his guards announces it. William Corvinus, nephew of Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, protector of the North and King's Hand, comes to Dreadfort as Lord Stark's messenger. Guard of the Stark house. Certain acts are unnecessary, often only the message is needed, but at other times, moments like this, it took someone to explain the questions the message recipient might have, Even if they could not go against their lord's order, Ruse might be suspicious. William's job was to lessen that fear. Ruse received the letter and slowly read it. A slight frown appeared briefly on his face. With a look at William, Ruse began to think. And then he spoke. The Boltons follow your lord's orders. Ruse Bolton speaks in a low voice, trying to force others who needed to listen to him to pay attention. At the king's orders, the North will do some military training for 2 to 3 years, after which time the soldiers return to their lords, William said. Things turned out to be weird, Ruse just looking at William with a weird look, and William, not wanting to talk more than necessary, was silent waiting for Bolton to say something. That way things ended. William sitting at the dining table next to the Bolton, he was feeling uncomfortable, things were very straightforward and no problem happened. Perhaps because there is no smell of war in the air the Boltons would not suspect, after all, who conspire against each other, the Stark are the least likely to do something like this. The best would be that, the worst. Well, William didn't know yet. Another day. William was already on the road again. The encounter with the Bolton was strange, but it was fast. Now he just had to go to White Harbor and then be on his way to King's Landing. In White Harbor things would be simpler. Manderley House was loyal to the Starks, only a few adjustments should be made. The letter was easily delivered and William was invited to spend a few days there. Politely William declined and said he was on his way to King's Landing to see his uncle and cousins. Wyman Manderley promised that he would fulfill Ned's orders to the best of his ability and be waiting for new orders. And then William continued his journey. A few days later, looking at the walls of King's Landing, William had finally reached his last place before traveling out of Westeros. Hi guys, laughing face. Thanks for the messages in the previous chapter, many interesting things have been said, I will try to be creative with the things that happen. The +2-year option was the winner. IngloriusEnd creators thoughts. 14 comments 0 vote. King's Landing, Road to Laura 3 part. Sure enough, this was the biggest city William stepped into in his life. It couldn't compare to some cities it was in his past life, but here it really had a special charm. When we speak about Winterfell we see a medieval place, but very near rustic and because of the weather the culture was more rigid. However, when we speak about capital of the Seven Kingdoms we speak in a place that fervently manifested a glorious point in a medieval world. The culture here was much more open, much more hectic. Happiness was something William couldn't help but feel. Finally a damn hot place, that's what he needed. Even accustomed to life in the north, William never liked to stay there, even if he liked the people there. The damn place was too cold for him. After a while he had stopped complaining to himself, but now with this mild temperature was impossible for him not to be happy about. William felt a great urge to relax under the sun. Well, it wasn't the right time for that. Before going to meet his uncle, William wanted to wander the busy streets of the capital. Sometime later. William was sitting in a chair while eating. In front of him was his uncle Ned Stark just watching him. Did you like King's Landing? Ned. After swallowing a chicken leg. Yes, very nice weather, William replied as he focused on the food. Ned looked at him with humor. If you wanted to, you can stay here. Ned didn't wait for William to answer himself and questioned. Are you sure about the order in White Harbor? Are you really wanting to do this? Ned. Yes, it is necessary, but it will take some time anyway, don't worry, William replied as he finished eating. Well, it was something of your choice, don't regret it if it goes wrong, Ned. William nodded as he sipped the rest of the drink into his glass. The trip must have been tiring, Ned. It was good, a little time consuming, but it was good. Where are the girls? William. Ned started to laugh. Well, Sansa is with her friends somewhere learning about court life. Arya insisted she wanted to learn how to use the sword. I found a master for her, Ned. The conversation continued for a few more topics. William eventually said he would stay shortly before leaving for Bravos. His uncle already knew this decision of William, so he just tried to get William to take some Stark's guards with him. William thought about it. But, he declined and said he could hire some mercenaries so his trip wouldn't get too much attention. Ned eventually agreed to a little concern about that. Night came and William was finally in a place where he would get his subjects to test. Careful not to be seen, William stole secretly out of his room through the window and ran silently into the partially lit streets of King's Landing. While walking, William was trying to choose. Unlike the north, there was plenty of prey here. Trying to get to the outskirts of town looking for a location that was slightly accessible to him, William trapped his target in prey. Solemn was walking after beating and robbing a couple, hiding in the alleys while counting his profits. The day had been good, he and your friends went beyond profit, some fun. Shit, that bitch was tight, I should have dragged her into the alleys until tomorrow, too bad the damn bitch wouldn't stop screaming. Solemn thought with satisfaction. Solemn along with his friends were part of a gang, acted mainly at night, but today had been a busy day in the capital and luckily they saw some distracted travelers. The man was chubby and old, an appearance of a rich merchant typical together to him was a beautiful young woman, an appearance that made her almost as much like one of those ladies. The boys enjoyed it. Solemn vulgarly scratched his groin as he walked, remembering his crimes. It was a common occurrence on the periphery for him, but it was not normal to find such clean women. He couldn't stop congratulating. Today not having to pay for these whores, Solemn thought. As he walked down the alleys he saw another easy target, a young nobleman walking slowly toward him. Shit, what luck, the brat chose the wrong place to get lost, Solemn. Solemn was very excited tonight, wanted to close the day with some blood. Oh, nice would be to kill one of those cocky nobles. Solemn began to plan his future actions. Slowly Solemn brought his hand to his dagger that was stored in his pants. As the young nobleman was passing his side, Solemn made a quick blow with the dagger, aimed at the neck. William was following his target, a robber, but it stank of blood, surely the right guy. While following his target through the alleys, William was surprised by a passerby strike. It was a dagger thrust aimed at his neck. Well, unfortunately, the target of this attack was a Lycan, not anyone, but the first of all those would come. Only with his reflexes did William prevent the attack. The damn boy had held his arm, how the hell was that possible? Solemn tried to move his arm, but it was impossible. With a quick thought he decided to take another blow, but before he could react he saw something scary. The young nobleman's eyes were something dangerous, something monstrous. He was paralyzed only to find those eyes that were as cold as the steel of a sword against his neck. His vision went black. Solemn woke up a few moments later, tried to move, but could not. Looking at the environment he saw only trees. He felt a chill in his back. Looking at his hands, they were tied. He also realized that he was shirtless and strange symbols were painted on his chest. His fear just grew. Solemn tried to speak, but no voice came out of his mouth because in front of him was the young man, partially naked, wearing only his pants and looking at him with a cruel look. Solemn knew death was very close. To Solemn's horror the boy began to squirm and the thing that happened in front of his eyes was simply hellish. The boy's fingers, hands, feet began to change and sharp claws came up. Slowly the boy's face began to lengthen and look like a wolf. Solemn couldn't stand it and ended up peeing himself. With slow steps the monster began to walk towards Solemn. He began to shake, trying as far as possible to run away, but he could not. The monster grasped his neck with one hand and lifted him into the air. To Solemn's surprise, the monster began to speak in an animalistic voice that only a reminder of a human voice was felt. The monster speaks strange words, it seemed that it was not talking to him. The monster brought his other hand toward his chest and then slowly began to dig a hole in Solemn's chest. The pain was horrible, the finger slowly entered his flesh, blood trickled, rumbles of pain came out of his mouth, but he could do nothing. When the monster stopped talking, Solemn began to bleed out from his mouth. His body ached everywhere, his limbs began to twist, tried to turn something, after a while even one of his eyes began to leak blood. It wasn't long before Solemn died. William was looking at the bandit that attacked him, now all covered in blood and with twisted limbs, such a horrible sight. No doubt William knew that trouble would arise, but the result was far more brutal than expected. With a sigh, William tried to comfort himself, at least there was a lot more trash to clean in this city. Looking at the night-covered sky with no sign of any sunlight, well he had time until dawn, maybe finding a snack was good. 25 comments 0 vote. Hunt, Road to Lorith 4 part. A very dark night, even though every night there was evil prowling everywhere and some light trying to purge it, that night was special for King's Landing. It was the darkest first hour, the moment when greater darkness devoured smaller darkness. These minor darkness were somewhat crueler, more brutal than the one that hunted them, for they hunt innocent, but undoubtedly, the monster that eats monsters must receive their due respect. That night some fear makers felt its coldest, purest form. They felt the dread. William was very hungry, so hungry that the moment the first drop of blood was seen by his eyes his hunger took him. It was supposed to be just a snack before bed, but now it has become a massacre. Blood splatter and body debris everywhere. The great white monster was covered in blood. Only after satiation did William manage to control himself. It was hard to say that he controlled himself, it was more as if hunger returned control of his body. If it were another world, William could be known as the sin of gluttony. 22 men, 22 sinners were visited by the white dread. Strength filled every inch of William's body, the sensation of pure delight. Wonderful. Slowly William returned to his human form, but still stood, eyes closed and a satisfied smile on his lips. Flexing your body muscles while extending your arms. William felt his strength growing. Lycan's form maximized the power of his senses and provided him with monstrous form and speed, but William was still fragile in his human form, yet after each kill, after devouring, his strength increased in both forms. Even if the improvement does not focus on strength, speed or even increase more than 1 point at a time, his senses one at a time were enhanced, and at that moment, after devouring so many beings, William gained an improvement in his strength. If before that moment William at 14 years old was almost as strong as an elite soldier, now he could in his human form fight against some of the best together. Disregarding your other powers of course. Already in its Lycan form, the measure was never separate individuals, but in groups, William did not know how many could face head-on, he walked a path that could oppose the world with only his flesh and blood. The power that William, as the first Lycan possessed, was immeasurable, it was impossible to see how long he would grow up, how long his power would increase. But undoubtedly his strength would be remembered forever alongside the strongest beings in this world, perhaps, as the most powerful. At least it was William's thought as he felt the force run through every cell of his body. Some time before, William was looking at the bandit that attacked him, now all covered in blood and with twisted limbs, such a horrible sight. No doubt William knew that trouble would arise, but the result was far more brutal than expected. With a sigh, William tried to comfort himself, at least there was a lot more trash to clean in this city. Looking at the night-covered sky with no sign of any sunlight, well he had a time until dawn, maybe finding a snack was good. William looked at the twisted body and shook his head, he would not eat this thing, after trying to perform the ritual it was impossible to know what could happen if swallowed, not to mention it was disgusting. He eventually decided that he would hunt something else in town, but first, he had to discard that body. Running silently over the structures, William was hunting, guided by the smell, he was after those who had a specific smell, who had a specific mark. Chasing one of his prey William was guided into a remote area of King's Landing, guided to a decaying mid-size house that appeared to be long abandoned. It was similar to a ruin. Carefully, William moved close enough to hear what was being said from within. The voices belonged to several men. Lucky, one voice. You damn lucky bastards, you found a hot little whore, while daddy here had to fuck a mangy bitch, 2 voice. The 7 are good for their faithful haha, 3 voice. As if the gods would help you, voice 2. The men's voices inside were jubilant, it was obvious some were cheering and others gnawing with envy that they had not been so lucky. William was happy, dinner would be plentiful. Bandit A was heading toward the warehouse for a few more beers. Something seemed to have gone behind his back, he looked back. There was nothing but darkness there. Shit, it would be nice to have some candles, Bandit A thought. He grabbed some drinks and started walking toward the dorm, B and C should be waiting for him. Looking around, several of his friends were sleeping, other drunks while others kept bragging. He heard some strange noises from afar. Damn lucky, who choke and die, he cursed. Slowly approaching the dormitory, a strange sound was being audible. Probably the damn termites, this house was almost falling over their heads. Damn old house. While walking he eventually slipped and almost fell, luckily managed to avoid the fall. The damn floor was wet. Bandit A decided to blow his stuffy nose. His nostrils were assaulted by the smell of iron, a familiar smell on his job. Realizing what might have happened, he silently leaves the beers on the floor and picks up his dagger that was stored in the sole of his shoe. He thought of warning the others, but it could be a prank on one of those shits, so not to be joked he chose to go it alone. The sound stopped. With courage, or almost, he kept walking, surely it must be those shits, they were trying to scare him. Motherfuckers, I'm going to gut one of them tonight, Bandit A thought as sweat dripped from his forehead. Carefully entering the room where he was supposed to have 8 of his friends, together with B and C, he knew there could be nothing wrong, it was simply impossible. Who would go into a gang hideout to kill? Well, apart from the guards. And the other gangs and well, there were some who would come in, but what would you do today when everyone was there? Slowly pushing the curtain in place of the door through the dim light of a candle, he saw a horrible scene. Bodies dismembered and blood everywhere. A dreadful scene. With a quick turn toward the exit. In front of him was a monstrous freak before he could run or even scream. A hand went through his stomach and suspended him in the air. Good blood dripping from his mouth and wide eyes, he looked at the thing that attacked, and then a wet cracking sound sounded. The hand that had crossed his stomach had grabbed his spine and broken it. Shortly afterward, a hungry mouth attacked him. After a while, no bones remained. Looking toward the sound coming, William began to walk toward his last fangs. Most were unconscious from the drink, only 4 were standing, but not in a fighting condition. It was only necessary for the wolf to enter the flock for the feast. Quickly William surprised 2 of the talking bandits, and with 2 hard blows with his claws, one head rolled across the floor and one man had a half head attached to his neck. The other 2 men saw him and began to scream. Too bad the fear got in the way so much, his fumbling movements only made William's job easier. With a blow with his right arm, one of the thugs was sent flying through some walls. Unfortunately, this was not an anime shonen and his body had several internal wounds, he would die quickly. Looking at the last man who passed out in fear, William just approached and began to feed. 17 comments, 0 vote. Pissed. Download the app for additional rewards. More events, more perks. Winning you more free perks. Download now. IngloriusEnd. Download app now. Little Red Riding Hood, Road to Lorith 5 Part. William was only wearing shorts while lying in a pool in the inner courtyard. The roof over his head was open, but still partially closed enough for the shade to soften the sun's heat a little. A feeling that reminded him of his good times in his other life, so nostalgic. His eyes were half open, looking like he was sleeping, but in fact, he was just relaxing in the sun. What a wonderful feeling it was, the warmth radiating through his body, the sunlight pleasantly reflected by the water, not to mention the maids that constantly brought to him juices and fruits. It was a life full of benefits, such a pleasant life. At a time like this, it was almost possible to forget the plots surrounding this place, it was almost possible to forget that there were more important things to do. A sage man knows that even at times like this, a moment before a storm, it was necessary to rest, to occupy his mind with frugality, not at all times, but little things at various different times prevent a healthy mind from becoming ill. William was just being lazy, but let the first mortal point a finger at him, and said this, he doubted it would happen, well if they knew what he was after all. Fast paces began to echo, getting closer and closer. Soon a scream of a child was heard and the sound of water. Looking toward the little troublemaker, William saw Arya approaching him while swimming like a puppy. William, I missed you, Arya said as she swam around William. Oh, who are you? Your face is slightly familiar. Maybe some brat I forgot. William spoke with a smile on the corner of his lips. You dare. Arya began to speak in a threatening tone. He just slowly turned his face away from her, a bad choice. Arya attacked him with cruel fingers, even for a Lycan those nudges between the ribs were deadly. William writhed, but then with a sage's movement things reversed, with his cruel fingers he began his counterattack. A bold brat, I must say, but dares to defy the great William, William spoke narcissistically. Amid laughter and attempted escape, little Arya at the age of 7, and all the cuteness in the world began to respond in height to the tyrant who tormented her with these deadly actions. New footsteps began to be heard. The careless patriarch of the Lycans was attacked from behind and seized by powerful young hands that had immobilized him in a hug. William, you should have come sooner, the little monkey that grabbed him by the back said, obviously that little monkey's name was Sansa. William slowly pushed her away and he looks into the eyes of little 11-year-old Sansa. I know you. Don't I remember anyone like you? William spoke with a curious expression on his face. Sansa, outraged by her cousin's response, stares at him with her small hands on her waist. William Corvinus, dare you? Sansa looks serious, a pose very similar to that of her mother. William stretched his arms in a pose that said, no doubt about it. Soon the little villain who had been released from his penance and the young Frown who had just arrived attacked him, cruel little fingers poking his ribs. Sounds of laughter were heard from the inner courtyard of the mansion that the king's hand lived. Some time later, on the streets of King's Landing, William needed to find a mercenary company so that he could leave for Lorith. Now was the first time he would use to find them. He knew there were some establishments all over the capital. Unfortunately, it was not something centralized as in Oriental novels in this mercenary world. In addition to those who used to be hired for war, they usually had a headquarters as a company. William had received his uncle's advice, so he was already targeting some of these establishments, and things went like this. First establishment. It was a luxurious, spacious and sophisticated place. Entering, William was received very carefully. Their speeches, the wisest mercenaries a nobleman could want. were good, but William needed to mask his aristocratic title for a while, otherwise, Stark house guards would work. Second establishment, William was welcomed by young women, who said that in addition to protection they were responsible for giving some entertainment to their clients, men or women. The motto was, satisfaction was guaranteed. Shit, William wanted non-whores mercenaries. Third establishment was a reasonable place, not exaggerating at all. The mercenaries who would accompany him, if he hired them, would be former soldiers used to escort missions. William was pleasantly happy with this place. It could be them, but before hiring them he had one more place to go. William was slowly walking towards Blackwater Bay, would see the last establishment and return, his thoughts focused on his goal. After solving these things he should do. With his curious eyes, William looked around. And then someone bumped into his arm, with flowing red cloak, long black hair flying through the air, a beautiful young woman running past him. William looked at this young woman with surprise, not because of her beauty or even her misbehavior, but because of her resemblance to someone else, to someone he had met in another movie. Stunned, William awoke with a soft voice beside him. Sorry, my little sister, she's a bit agitated, doesn't pay attention to her manner. Woman. William looks at the bearer of that soft, pleasant voice and is again slapped in the face because of this woman's resemblance to someone he knew too. How can such similar people exist? William rambled. The woman looked at William's facial expression and spoke again. My name is Amelia from Red Roses. Again I apologize for my reckless sister, Amelia said as she held out a hand. William Corvinus, and nice to meet you. William looked at the beautiful woman who looked like Underworld Sonia, extending her gaze again to the red-cloaked young woman who ran along the street, which was similar to Underworld Celine. She's a nice person, just acts very. In a bad way. Amelia tried to soften her sister's lively behavior. Oh, don't mind, I have a similar person in the family, I understand you. But, did you just say Red Roses, from the mercenary group? William. Amelia gave a small smile and with a sharp look questioned him. You doubt a woman's ability to be a mercenary, Mr. Corvinus? Amelia. William answered quickly. No, by no means, I don't doubt a woman's ability for any function. Just wondering why I was going to talk to their leaders, I need to hire some guards. William justified. Amelia's gaze softened, but some doubt was still there. But before he continued to speak, a soft but magnetic voice finally interrupted his plans. Sis, how daring of you, but I approve him, he is hot. Little Red Riding Hood spoke while thumbing with her hand and expressing her face. I understand you. What are you saying, Emily? I was just apologizing for your rudeness, Amelia answered emphatically as a faint shade of red appeared on her face. My rudeness? Don't try to lie, Amelia. Emily responded in a way that teased her sister. Emily then turned her gaze to William and assessed him. Nice. What you think of my sister? I know she's a little old, but you won't regret it. Emily tried to sell her sister, really looked like a pimp trying to sell her employees' services. Amelia advanced toward her sister and with her hands tried to prevent her from continuing to speak. Sorry, I need to go now, Amelia. After saying goodbye, she dragged her sister and disappeared into the crowd. William was looking in the direction the sisters left. Sonia and Celine, undeniable resemblance, funny that such similar people exist, William thought as he walked toward the last establishment. 26 comments, 0 vote. New Horizons. Anxiety is a strangely important thing at times when new experiences begin to appear on the horizon or even just ahead of you. This feeling engages you in the beginning. When you have no experience, anxiety turns out to be your greatest executioner. With a bit of bad luck, fear can pervade your soul for a long time, but if you can face it when there is a second moment that you need to face it, it will be so much easier. William in all this new life inevitably had to face this feeling several times. At times he failed, but with perseverance, he kept walking. After all, there are not many beings in the world who know about the future. Stay drift so that things happen as they should, as others choose to happen. In many moments, the desire to leave the bonds that kept him in the way of the tragedy was big, and with a little irresponsibility run for an adventure, a means to escape, a means to pretend it was the only way to do something in this world. But William had long managed to overcome many of the limits imposed on him by fear, was no longer guided by anxiety, things were good now. Mainly because he had accepted his family, lived like a damn normal human, no longer a mere spectator who luckily or unlucky ended up in such a magical place. Even in all his inexperience, well, not exist many of those who can say much that they had an experience of what he went through, but then in the ensuing moments, all the choices he made, he didn't regret it. Even if a novice in such a cruel, demonstrably cruel world, William was convinced to live, but not merely an experience, but an accomplishment. His dreams were at his fingertips, fate enabled him, choices only guided him. This moment that approached every minute was his rightfully. Some people may live for life or for some pleasure, others may truly pursue their dreams, but how many are really satisfied with their choices? The great people often became who they were by luck, lucky to be born in the right family, in the right place, to meet the right people. But there were those who truly were great by their actions, not because they knew others, but because they knew themselves. Even in the midst of intrigue and delusion, men and women struggle in a fleeting attempt to live, others just give up their lives for failing to achieve what would really make them happy. What would make William happy? What are your dreams? What is your greatest wish after all? Some people have strong senses, and with that, they realize the small changes that happen. In many moments they can even predict certain events. William, like these people, could feel that he was close to achieving his dreams, even if not fully, he felt that he was close to achieving something big. Perhaps like many people at different times in history, William was destined to be luckier, perhaps not. Even though coming into this world was very good, even with all the benefits that existed, William inevitably felt sad at many times. He had lost many things to achieve this world. Even if he didn't know the reason for his coming into this world, even though he knew that many would die from this opportunity, William still suffered from losing so much: his family, his friends, his life. But now, after so many years, fighting with all his might, he has definitely achieved an achievement. He felt part of this world and knew that his dreams should be pursued. His ambition was not that of a mere bystander, it was the ambition of a lifetime. Like a starving wolf, he would devour every opportunity that arose, with his advantages vigorously tracing his way. And now, well, it was the time for the Lord of the Lycans to begin his plots. It was the moment for the Lord of the Lycans to ascend. Looking at the waves crashing on the hull of the ship, William happily expected to see the Bravo's Colossus, something that should be grand, would see something grand like the Colossus of Rhodes, or perhaps much more splendid. A soft voice came to wake him from his reverie. "Mr. William, this will be your first time in Bravos," Amelia said as she slowly approached. William kept looking at the horizon as he answered. "Yes, but unfortunately, it will be brief, just a stop and I'll be on my way to Loreth, William." "I see, a pity, these days in your company, even as a hired mercenary. I must say that we are good friends, but the days were brief," Amelia replied with some melancholy, slowly moved beside William and as he gazed at the horizon. "I must say, I am immensely happy to say that feelings are mutual, my dear friend," William replied as he glanced briefly at Amelia's beautiful face. "Even if your destination is Bravos, the roads of destiny will make us meet again. In the future I will come here." William: "Yes, of course, we'll see in the future, but I must ask you to take care of my sister and have a little patience with her. Even if she's 19, she is actually a small child," Amelia said with a smile in her eyes. "Oh, don't worry, I'll take care of her," William replied as he put his hand to his head. Emily was a headache, but still a friend, even though her personality was very peculiar. It was acceptable, just a little too spicy. After his fateful meeting with the sisters, William continued his journey, and as he spoke to the mercenary leader of the Red Roses, Mr. Abraham, who told him that this was a family business, many cousins and close friends participated, but still similar to another mercenary company in Red Roses, its agents were former soldiers, or even people trained their entire lives within the family. After all, a family that worked in this kind of work would end up having their children train early. So, William decided to hire them. It made no sense not to. Hiring them and making the time of the trip, William left. On the day of the trip, the girls, Amelia and Emily, along with 4 other mercenaries, arrived at the ship. With a quick chat, William learned that Amelia was a manager of one of her mercenary company branches in Bravos and that she would be returning home. Emily was preparing to start working as a mercenary. She would be the leader of this small squad. The trip passed quickly, but it was long enough for the 3 to interact enough to become friends. Amelia has a mature and responsible personality, was a widow, even with her 24 years was married, common in this world, but William can't help but be surprised by the information. Already Emily, well, was a very agitated person, acted as if he was very liberal, but in truth it was a facade for her slightly shy personality. A very tasty contradiction, William had to say. Emily was 19 and how his sister had gone through family training, but in the end she chose the warrior's path, and she was very good, a great fighter. The time they spent together, William ended up interacting more with Amelia. Their personalities were closer, their tastes too. She was definitely a lost friend in this world. They talk mostly about the story and legends, extremely enjoyable. With Emily it was more provocative. The little devil was very playful, teased him for whatever reason and tried to make his sister embarrassed doing certain innuendos, but she was a good person, just peculiar. Before saying goodbye to Amelia in Bravos, William had handed her a quantity of gold and a request, that would be for buy 50 unsullied. Amelia agreed, and said to wait for a time, some months more precisely, she would send a letter to her aunt who was a merchant in Volantis and would make the deal, the unsullied would be delivered to Lorith. After a few days, William was arriving in Lorith. 30 comments 0 vote. So scary. I need to run. Lorith and its territory, which would be several islands of different sizes, were located in the northern portion of the continent, near Bravos, to the east to be precise, being on the Trembling Sea. The city was on the largest of the 3 islands, which was surrounded by stormy waters. Lorith might be small, sparsely populated, but it was developing. Even there was a small colony on the continent, which was called Morosh. This place was once populated by a people known as the mazemakers, who created various mazes, most of them being made in the Lorith region itself. These people, as strange as they may seem, were mainly made up of the people called hairy men, who somehow remembered the Homo neanderthalensis taught in history classes. The second people were the Andals. But all of this was a long time ago today. Due to the purge of Lorith, these peoples were no longer part of the islands. It is currently governed by a well-known council of magistrates, which are made up of nobles, priests, and merchants. William set foot in the small port of Lorith. Looking around he could see only simple people, poor merchants, and many fishing vessels and one military man at sea. It was a very poor place, known as the poorest free city, somehow reminded William of the north. Slowly he walked toward the city, watching the city and the people. It was easy to see that it was not common to have many visitors here, with each step taken a new pair of curious eyes looking toward his group. The crowd left a distance from the group. Those closest to it tried their best to pull away, after which they turned their eyes to William and stood like statues. It was somewhat disturbing, but it made sense, something that would happen anywhere in this situation, which would be William's ethnic difference to the natives. William's pale white skin stood out easily, glowed so brightly that it could blind their eyes, something totally different from the dark people of this place which shone in a beautiful bronze in the sun. William had not faced such a situation yet. In the north, all were fair skin, while in King's Landing, he was short time, but still there were many northerners there. Well, even if William was famous now, he could say no less about Emily, but as funny as it sounds, the men in this place are shy, just looking and turning their faces quickly, afraid she would see their eyes. Well, the same could not be said of women. Perhaps to make up for this failure of men, they acted more aggressively, locked eyes on William and nearly stripped him right there. Creepy. William wondered if Emily was born here. Is the personality so similar? But with a slight glance to the side, William realized that the beautiful mercenary was disturbed, holding the sword at her waist with one hand and in a defensive position, ready to attack. William decided to distill some poison to get revenge a little. Who would say brave Lord Emily fears a few glances, William says with a teasing look. Emily looks at him in the crowd and then responds with concern in his voice. It would be bad for my reputation if my employer gets abused in the middle of the street. That's my damn first job, Emily said with concern and a little anger in her voice. William paused for a second, his mind blank. He didn't expect that answer. Things weren't that serious, were they? Looking around, a frightening sight was glimpsed by William. Many women were agitated, some rubbed their thighs rhythmically, others gazed at him with red eyes, and to make matters worse many were drooling down their chin. Shit, William shouted inwardly and started to stumble and run towards the nearest inn. He needed to be quick, we were talking about his dignity after all. Only after locking the bedroom door could he control himself. The fear passed, that was scary. A slight knock on the door sounded, with a start of the startle, William staring at the door suspiciously. Who is it? William asked. William could hear a slight cough outside and then a knock again. William with a little more courage approached the door. Who's there? William. Still no answer, but now William heard well. It wasn't a cough, it was someone holding back a laugh. Knowing who was on the other side, William opened the door and saw a woman with a red face and watery eyes. He looked at her, she looked at him, and then a tympanic-destroying laugh sounded. A few centuries later, Emily had already overcome her fit of laughter but was still looking at William with amusement. Walking over to him, she patted his shoulder. Don't worry, maiden, I'll protect you from these beasts, Emily said in a chivalrous tone. William looked at her and felt helpless. Looking at William's facial expression, she spoke again. Don't be afraid, mommy is here to take care of you, Emily said now in a motherly tone. William responded by trying to defend himself. It's not like that, I was just scared that something so strange happened, it was an exception, William. Emily looked at him and patted his shoulder again. No need to pretend, I know, Emily said with a careful tone. William was already getting annoyed, but he had nothing to do. William the seducer, I have to tell this to my sister, well, actually she already knows, after all, she was seduced, right? Emily spoke back to her ordinary personality. Some hours later. William was rereading some books that talked about the places where the ancient people of Lorith might have hidden their treasures, diamonds and most importantly, where they might have hidden their books. Of course, these books did not describe directly, but reported on the customs of the ancient peoples, the places of their temples, and the entry of some labyrinths, these things being partly hidden to this day and hopefully, William could find one of those lost temples. If he was unlucky, he would have to enter the ruler's library of that place, well, honestly he would go there anyway. Looking up at the slowly darkening sky, William wondered if he should do something today, but then his gaze landed on the bed. Well, it was better to leave for another day, he was exhausted from the ship's voyage. Other day. William was slowly coming down for coffee. Footsteps began to be heard behind his back, and then someone jumped and clung to him. If he wasn't a Lycan, without the increases he had, at that moment William's face would have only one destination, that was to be crushed to the ground. Well, at least it was nice, a soft body was pressing on his back, a warm breath on his neck, his younger brother eventually waking up from his sleep faster than him. Wow, I thought you'd fall like a sack of potatoes, Emily said with some sadness and surprise in her voice. Are you trying to kill me? William asked, exasperated by Emily's speech. Still clutching William's back she kept talking. I thought your muscles were just for aesthetics, so amazing, you're strong dude. Emily spoke with some interest. Enjoying being there. William said a little impatiently, the fellow downstairs was getting a little cocky. Of course, let's go little horse, Emily said excitedly as she jumped while grabbed to William's back. Needless to say, it was a sweet torment for William, he didn't even know if he should tell her to come down. It had been a long time since he had had contact with the opposite sex and after so many years he had even forgotten about this little detail, but now that made something in him that was literally asleep emerge. When he came into this world, luckily, he was influenced by his growth stage, even though his 20-year-old mind was there, he didn't mature anymore, in fact he even regressed a few years, being a child for so long affects, inevitably. It could be said that William's mindset was currently fully recovering, all the details he had forgotten began to color. Looking at the third leg that had grown between his legs, William didn't know what else to do, shit, he needed to get away from this place without the others seeing. The thought of pride in being so manly crossed William's mind, but looking at that freak that had come up there, it was much more animalistic. Not even Junior was saved, he was also a monster, William thought sadly, his fate was decided, he would be an animal at all, what the hell. Realizing William's silence, Emily was a little worried, maybe she hurt the boy, carefully descending the boy's back, without first giving a little grab without realizing it, she goes ahead and sees something disturbing. What giant thing is this between your legs? Hi guys laughing face. IngloriusEnd creators thoughts. 28 comments 0 vote. Lucky. William was walking slowly toward one of the likely places that might have entrances to underground mazes, with a bit of luck could find places intact. Even though the ancestral people of this region were known for their mazes, they were only historical accounts, things themselves long since disappeared amid the waves of time. But if one of these places were found, it was possible that William would make a really scary profit, for in addition to the ritual books there was the possibility of finding tons of other treasures and even though he said he wanted nothing more than the books, it was inevitable. Feel excited about expecting to find mysterious things. However, the trip was already a little sad, this place William was going to be, would not be the first one he was going to, in fact, it was the fifth. All other points, without exception, were totally different from the book's accounts, and for this reason, it was not one of the real points of creation. There were still 7 other places to visit, but William felt that this next place would be different, felt that it would be special somehow. It had to be, something in his blood vibrated with each step, the closer to the place he felt. It was a strange feeling, without much explanation, the closest he felt to that feeling would be when he fed on sinners, but unlike this vibration, his blood burns and he feels his strength grow. This vibration just gave his heart a little itch, made him feel that he was coming close to something that might be helpful, something that could help him. This help was not something material or related, it was some form of benefit to herself, a form of resonance with her bloodline. Expectations were rising with each passing second. After a while, some ruins appeared in William's line of sight. Quickly he and his guards advanced in that direction. Looking around, William saw only remnants in some places that reported that a long time ago there was a building in this place. These remnants were so fragile that if you did not know what you were looking for, you would definitely not see anything unusual about these stones. Carefully William and his guards began searching for a secret passage. Needless to say, this passage was extremely difficult to find, but with luck, it would be possible, right? The hours passed and night was approaching, no clues were found. William was frustrated, he knew there was something there, not sure what it was, but surely there was something. His guards were slowly preparing a temporary camp, today they would spend the night here. William was wanting to talk to someone, he wanted to be distracted, but the problem was, Emma was avoiding him for what happened today over coffee and the other guards were silent. William looked at Emily and began to remember what happened in the morning. She was stuck behind William's back and so she went downstairs and went to see what was wrong with him. You were pretending to be tough, right? Where did you get hurt? Emily spoke in a tone that an older sister would use toward her younger brother. Before William said anything she started to look at him to see if something was wrong so her eyes detected an abnormality. What giant thing was that between his legs? What are you hiding there? Emily asked curiously, she began to think he had hidden something. William turned evasively on his back. Nothing, William answered with a little embarrassment and discomfort at the situation. Emily approached. Tell me, I want to know. Emily started talking more curiously and moved a little closer. Then the shit happened. William tried to escape, but being in a state that prevented him from being agile was quickly intercepted, but this time she said nothing more, only used eyes that were on her fingers to see. Damn, when people have questions about something, they say, let me see, so right after that they grab this thing in their hands and tries to see. William froze, an electric current passed through his body, it was a pleasant sensation, he couldn't lie was awesome, but what the fuck is going on? This is real. Was he still sleeping? If that wasn't enough, she began to squeeze. What are you hiding there? Show me. I want to see it. Emily began to speak in a spoiled tone, her magic hands continuing to feel him. William was partially frozen, but was trying to escape, which only made Emily more agitated. She was almost pulling on his pants to see what he was hiding. And then they heard a coughing. She turned to see who was there and saw the owner of the inn before she could ask why she was scolded. Please, the woman asks the young man and the young woman to do these indecent things in their rooms. The female innkeeper spoke in a disapproving tone. We're not doing anything, he's just hiding something from me. Emily spoke without understanding as she moved her hand with more tempting vigor to find out what it was, to prove her answer. We don't. Emily, a little confused, defended herself again from the innkeeper's accusing look, but suddenly lightning struck her. She looked at William and saw that his face was strange and his eyes could devour her alive. She stepped back and looked where her hands had been, and the subtle perception of the thing that might be hiding there that arose in her mind was being aggressively contested in her mind. She started to shake her head in denial, but it couldn't be that, right? Looking back at that immensely long, thick thing, it was impossible to believe. But by William's reaction was the right answer. Her face went very red quickly and, even faster, she ran toward her room, leaving a poor William with Horny to behind. Shit, I need a woman, William thought in agony. A damn lucky one. All of these events happened due to the fact that he was seen as a child, a little brother. Well, he could still be treated that way, but now she knew he wasn't just a boy. Now, looking at her, William was a little uncomfortable, but he needed to think of something to solve this problem. William got up the courage and started walking toward her. He would sort things out. Emily was helping set up camp. She had a long tree branch in her hands that would be broken into pieces and would fuel the fire. Hi, what are you doing? William asked. Shit, what a dumb question, it was obvious what she was doing. Emily, who was focusing on her work, ends up making a surprising little jump and looks at William. She slightly freezes, but begins to return to normal. She was an adult, and besides what happened was just a mistake. Who would say the boy had such a lethal weapon? She tries to focus and looks at her hand and then at William. Can't you think of a hypothesis? Emily asks with some humor. It was obvious that he was trying to fix the accident. Well, some ideas. William responds a little embarrassed by the simplicity of his question. He breathes a sigh of relief. Things are back to normal. In the morning they searched again for clues and near the end of the afternoon, they could find it. 9 comments 0 vote. The maze. It was a narrow entrance, part of it was obstructed by some stones that with only one pick could be removed. Fortunately, there was room for one at a time to enter. The way down was quite spacious, enough for 10 people to walk side by side. As they walked through the maze, William tried to remember the facts he had read. If he was not mistaken, the mazes were staggered in various forms. The smaller ones had a similar extent to the interior of a large noble house, would have approximately 60 rooms that would be linked by a large number of paths. His defense was only the entanglement of paths. These were the ones built by small temples. If it were the little one, he would probably find nothing. The second would be those built by the high priests of large temples. These would be twice to quadruple the size of the little ones, and as a defense in addition to using a large number of paths, it also had some traps that were scattered throughout the place, this maze. If there was a great possibility of having rare ritual books, it would be nice if the current maze were at least this one. The third type of maze was that made by various temples and nobles, were made with extreme complexity, had an absurd amount of traps and an extremely confusing path. The treasures that could be found in this type of maze was stupendous. With luck in this maze makes him almost as rich as a Lannister or with so much ritual information that he could supply any problem he had. And finally, there was the Great Labyrinth. This would be the biggest of them all. Some say that even if the entrance was in Lorith, this labyrinth would extend beneath the whole continent, so big that it would be a great misfortune to come across. To identify which maze you were in, besides completing it, of course, would be by analyzing some symbols that were printed on the entries. A symbol like G would be for the little ones, something like an R would be for the medium, for the big one would be 2 symbols which resembled C, and another with B. The only distinction would be in the Great Labyrinth, which had no symbol, it was just a cave that you would unluckily enter and never leave alive. Carefully William approached the wall and began searching for that symbol, noting the marks on the slopes on the walls he eventually found, but to his misfortune, it was only partially visible. Most had been destroyed by time. The part that was visible resembled the bottom of the C, but he wasn't sure. Looking around the symbol for a missing B, to his dismay, he found nothing, probably not A, C, but A, G. With a little sadness about his discovery, William began to decide whether to try to complete this maze today or another day. Thinking about the pros and cons, he eventually decided to return to the city and come back the other day with more supplies and properly prepared. Even though it was a small maze, unlucky it could get lost for a while, it was better to beware. Other day. The expedition to find the end of the maze was beginning. It was time to pick up the treasure and then go after the clues. The maze was slightly confusing, but with luck after a few hours they made it to the treasure room. In the center of the chamber was just a circular object on a small stone table. William approached followed by Emily and the other guards. He began to observe the object closely. It was a small black sphere with several silver symbols embedded in its surface. There was something that attracted him. It seemed that the small object attracted him for some reason, but he dared not touch it. The said treasure might be a trap, but after looking for a while he could see nothing strange. Why wait so long? Just take it, says Emily and quickly takes her hand and takes the object. She took the object and then threw it in the air for William to pick it up. The moment the cold surface touched his hand, the symbols on the sphere changed from silver to gold. A strange voice was whispering something in William's ears, but it was too low for him to hear. Blinking his eyes, he looks surprised at the sphere that was back to normal with the silver symbols, and then he turns his look to Emily. See, just get it. Emily spoke with an expression that said, I know everything. The floor crumbles. Cough, cough, cough. A lot of dust was in the air. It was horrible to breathe under these circumstances, so as the dust subsides, William is graced with the sight of a library full of books, but most striking, more than the books, was that impressively there was a tunnel with 2 very visible marks. These being a large C, and a small B, just below. To their surprise, it seemed that beneath the small grade maze treasure chamber was the large grade maze treasure room. William looked at all these events without understanding what was happening. What was the possibility of something like this happening? This was certainly much harder to happen than winning the lottery. With a look around, he only saw books. Apparently, that was all the treasure. Not that he was complaining. In this room there must have been more than 3,000 books. A sweet surprise, but more has always been better. Without waiting a second, William began his hunt the ritual books. The books that were here mostly reported methods for to make a maze. There were about 1800 books just for that purpose, the other 400 were about metallurgy, 500 about mining and the remaining 300 were about various forms of rituals. It was an absurd thing, just looking at some titles William was eager to know their information. But first he needed to read the ritual books, the rest could wait. 3 months later. William was able to read all the books that didn't need to be studied in a month, these being most of them. Luckily they were small books, they were quick to read. The problem was in separating the information, but even so, he would only read the books to understand their contexts, but those who needed study and attention took almost 2 months to finish. The profits from this expedition were monstrous, the amount of information he obtained was enormous. Apart from that, he had been able to formulate 10 possible ways to create other Lycans, he just needed to test them now. 12 comments 0 vote. Full moon. Using all this knowledge about ancient rituals was phenomenal. William was at that time looking at 42 bandits who were tested, all at the time being partially Lycans. Because he was a bit sure about the success he used in the initial test, a serial killer who demonstrated a partial transformation. If it goes wrong, William would have no guilty conscience, but with a successful operation, the first tier of Lycans were born. In succession of the tests already performed and currently, 40 Lycans of the first tier and 2 of the second. Well, what would the tier be? William devised a way to control, so that nothing less than perfect, his descendants and therefore carefully chose the rituals he used to create a Lycan, limited their power to the point that was chosen, thus making William the Entity X, with a power unmatched by that of its creatures. If William's Lycan form made him have strength, for example, 1000 tons, Tier 1 Lycan would have a strength of 10 tons, Tier 2 would be 15 tons, Tier 3 would have 20 tons and Tier 4 would have 25 tons. The numbers are merely for the sake of elucidation because William's power had no limits seen until then, but his descendants were clear limits that would be chosen by William. One way for a Tier 1 Lycan to evolve into Tier 2 would be through William. If he didn't want, the Lycan would not tier up in power. This tier increase was due to the amount of Lycan influence in that being. Another detail about William powers was, the moment the first Lycan was created him had his warg power awakened, he managed to get into the minds of his descendants and in addition to getting in he managed to whisper requests to them. These orders have to be completed by them, without the option of refusal. It was like a program, without executing that order that Lycan would not stop. The big point, the loyalty was something that seemed natural to the Lycans who were like wolves, they following the stronger, but William wanted to have more control over his descendants, so he does something inside the ritual. That thing was a way for the Lycans to be unable to go against or betray William. Any Lycan lineage would be his eternal servant. William's greatest demonstration of power was that unlike his descendants, he had complete control over his Lycan form, could also deeply control his emotions, and could also expand his size, something his descendants showed can't. Tier 1 Lycans increase their stamina, and the Lycan form was the same size as their human form, but they were more bestial, more similar to wolves than for human, even unable to stand upright. Their main characteristic was agility, but still strong. These monsters were much stronger than a human, those Lycans' fur was black. Tier 2, in human form the addition was a greater increase in vigor, had improved strength, received structures more robust. Lycan forms were still bestial like Tier 1 but were approximately 20% larger than their human forms, were stronger than Tier 1 and their characteristics are focused in strength, lost some of the agility of their past phase, but were faster in the straight line. The fur was a dark shade of gray near black. Tier 3 was the highest level William created so far. Tier 3 was special, they were developed for the leadership. In human form his physical improvements were general, their regenerations were stronger than the other tiers, and in Lycan form their body isn't enlarged, but their Lycan forms possessed more strength and agility than their others' brothers and had a humanized form, but that was still far than William's sophisticated form. Those Lycans was a lighter dark gray than Tier 2, but still not quite normal gray. How lighter fur was stronger the Lycan, purer was their lineage. There are 3 ways to create Lycans. The first was through the ritual that William did. The second form was made by Tier 3 Lycans who could use a short ritual to create Tier 1 Lycans. It was limited, each Lycan Tier 3 could only create 10 Tier 1 Lycans per year. And even appearing in this way they would all be servants of William. The last form was through reproduction. Lycans can only have children with other Lycans, they were a different species. After all, these young Lycans would be born as Tier 0, is limited to human form until maturity at 15 years old when they could reach Tier 1 automatically. Even in this method, William would still be their lord because of the origin of his ancestors. To William, all these Lycans were not really Lycans, they were something minor, only partially Lycans, but nonetheless very useful. William planned to create some more tiers in the future, which he would try to create new subspecies with other characteristics. Actually, William had created another ritual, but it was still incomplete. This was a ritual for creating true Lycans, something William had planned to give to his family only. This was a Lycan form based entirely on William's form. Even if it was thousands of times weaker, was the only one that could come closest to him, currently only limited to benefits in the human form, not even made possible to fully transform himself. His human forms had physical improvement focusing on agility and regeneration beyond a vigor very enlarged. Just like William, if they wanted in their human form, certain Lycans parts would immerse, which would be fangs and claws, something only true Lycans could, but their bodies could not expand in size. William still wondered what name to give this tier. He had thought of pure blood, but it was a lie. Only William would be pure blood, not even his children would truly be pure blood. He needed a name that would show the strength of these Lycans but not separate them from the others, for even if they could not betray him, they could lose morale and be unhappy. Maybe elders were a good name. It should be noted that William's present power was small near his potential, and his power in human form was not unbeatable. His Lycan form grew stronger much more easily. Due to their own lack of strength, all other Lycans did not currently exhibit their full potential. William was still unsure if he was immortal, but he knew that tier 1 to 3 Lycans had only a longer life than normal humans. Viewing these 42 freshly baked Lycans, a huge smile broke out on William's face. 40 comments, 0 vote. Flesh. Night was dark. Wind made a noise as they whistled past. It was not weather, for mild. It'd be said to be a quiet night, but in fact, unlike every other night, this was special. 42 became 160, but unlike the initial 42, these new recruits were selected from those who had the will to change their lives, but by the misfortune of fate the strings of poverty were tied. Among the current Lycans, only 40 were women. Even though William did not discriminate against them, it was still a strange idea for him to raise Lycans. His first objective was to create soldiers, but the truth was that he needed to do more than just an army, he needed to raise a race. With the new intent within him, he began not only turning isolated individuals into Lycans, but he also began to transform families into Lycans. But then you could weigh, would he use families as soldiers? The answer was no and yes. The reason for no was because of the fact that Lycans were much stronger than humans, and besides the advantages in fighting, they would also be better in physical work. The advantages of raising Lycans were many. Among all the reasons William could use to create Lycans, the main reason was to create people loyal to him. With these Lycans, William realized that people's personality was slightly altered after becoming Lycans. It was already expected, but the changes were very slight. It was surprising. When a person turned on one of them, that person would become more active, sleep less and do more things, and as a result of this change in aggression would not be increased generally, well, unless some other Lycan was injured or his family was threatened. An incident occurred. These new Lycans were moved to a closed region in Lorith, but before that, when living in their normal residences, a Lycan woman had been attacked by a gang when returning home at night. Well, attacking a Lycan was a bad idea in itself, and when her brother saw the intention behind these men, not even bones remained. The Lycans were more loyal to those alike. The aggressiveness turned out to be against those who were not part of their groups. William was facing the first 42 Lycans. Among them was a serial killer and the other 41 were robbers. He was wondering what to do to solve. It was hard to think of an answer. They were very loyal to him. Even when William entered their minds, he could see that loyalty. Well, while he planned to give these individuals a second chance, they would be an exception. In the modern world there was the idea of resocialization. Why couldn't he use this concept here for these individuals and give them a chance? Thus, these would be the only individuals he would transform from criminals. The serial killer was the one who worried the most William. With his whispers managed to change some things inside his personality. The power that William had over these individuals was frightening. He could make a monster into a saint and a saint into a monster. Even with all this power, William only interfered carefully. These sub-Lycans, unlike William, felt less like feeding and were able to satisfy with animals. Things just got complicated in fights. William went with them on some training. These were attacks on thugs, and well, even if the attack was in human form, the end result had not been very pretty. The hunger that arouses in a Lycan was very overwhelming. The more blood was shed, the stronger became and no doubt more frantic they would be. Tonight as well as some others they would attack a detachment, but this time William would take them all. The reason for so many Lycans in a training operation was simple. They would attack a group of 400 Dothrakis who had arrived on the island and were causing riot. Lorith's soldiers were not enough to stand against these Dothrakis and the magistrates would not use their personal guards for this. They were slowly approaching wearing the veil of night to help them increase their descriptions. They would attack this time already in Lycan form, could not risk being incapacitated in an operation against so many opponents. All slowly transformed their bodies and waited for William. These Lycans acted like beasts as soon as they touched their Lycan form, lost some of their minds in exchange for power. But if William were with them, everything would work out. His control over his actions was perfect. Slowly a great white monster stood out among the crowd of beasts. More than 3 meters, William held a monstrous appearance. Even the brutal front of his descendants could not prevent his appeal. With a great mighty howl, the Lycans pack advanced. Thomas was a slave today. He was following the Dothrakis who had arrived in Lorith. He had thought it might be useful for his business to get involved with these men, but it was a mistake. Even though he was a famous bandit in the region, he could not be the one enough to catch the attention of these Dothrakis. When he arrived he was soon enslaved, treated like rubbish. Fortunately, the female slaves were treated worse, so even if things got tough he could unleash his frustration when he could get his hands on these whores. But now there were many aimed at the Dothrakis and with that he had been assigned to a small battalion of fighting slaves. There were about 400 Dothrakis and 200 very poorly armed slave soldiers. If they were going to use these female slaves the number would make a huge leap. As anywhere a Dothraki would go a large number of slaves would follow him. No different here, there were over 400 slaves. The nights were uneven. The damn Dothrakis kept drinking and fucking the whores and the slave soldiers were used to watch. That damn life was so unfair. You go and work and the trash is enjoying life at your expense. Then you might wonder why you don't run away. Well, they didn't run away because they expected to get something back. They hoped to become soldiers of this call at some point. These Dothrakis had arrived in Lorith following a call who did not want to follow the great call. Perhaps it would be good to go after this Drogo one day. While complaining he began to hear a lot of howling. It was scary. Unlike the usual howls, these made his blood run cold. The wind that was pleasant for a second now was frightening. The mood had changed. Holding his spear tightly close to his body, he began to look around. He felt something was watching him. Looking around, the few slaves guarding this side of the camp was just as he, agitated, all felt that something abnormal was happening. When his gaze shifted to the left, he saw something black falling on one of the slaves. It was a black monster. His body was long and had a body that somehow resembled a man, but was undoubtedly some kind of big wolf. He looked away ready to ask for help, but everyone was in the same situation. Everyone was being devoured. When he went running, something caught him and lifted him up. He looked at the huge white beast that held him. Only a shout that was muffled by the noises of the night was heard. Hi guys. For Brazilians or Portuguese speakers, if you want to see the novel in Portuguese, access the Wattpad and look for my nick. Para os brasileiros, caso desejam ver a novel em Português, acesse o Wattpad e procurem por meu nick. Existem alguns benefícios em ler em Português, mas a velocidade de postagem não é uma delas kkkk.